Again, welcome, Hope. We're glad to have you with us. Hope recently retired after working with U.S. Congressman James Clyburn, South Carolina 6th District, for 23 years over 2 stints. She is currently a communications consultant in Columbia, South Carolina. She is from January 2019 to February 23. Hope worked in Washington, D.C. as communications director for Congressman Clyburn during his 4 years as House Majority Whip. In this role, she managed a team of 4 and was responsible for all internal and external messaging. She previously served as communications director in Congressman Clyburn's district office in Columbia from 95 to 2013. Between her 2 tenures with the congressman's office, Hope spent 5 years at the University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks, in strategic communications and project management. She worked with the president's office and the dean of the USC libraries. While at USC, she earned her master's in library and information science. She also holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from Boston University and is a graduate of Spring Valley High School in Columbia. Hope began her career as a radio and television reporter in Columbia and served as the South Carolina Democratic Party's first communication director before joining the congressman's office. Welcome, Hope. We're so glad to have you here.
Well, thank you, Trish. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. My good friend Laura Whitmore, who I see is there, roped me into this, but I thank her for doing that. I understand that this organization is all about empowering women to run for office or join boards, and I could not be more supportive of your cause and your mission, and really love what it is you're doing in the community, and would love for include me in what I can be helpful beyond this conversation. As you mentioned, I retired recently, which seems a little strange. I'm not really of the age that one typically retires, but the federal government does afford you the luxury of 23 years and being able to collect a federal pension. So I'm taking advantage of that, but I'm not retired. I'm working currently, right now I'm working with Jim Clyburn on a forthcoming book. So that's going to be my labor of love for the next 6 months or so. If you saw the table around me, I'm sitting in my dining room surrounded by books. So doing lots of research right now. Yeah, it's nice to be able to step back, though, a little bit from the day-to-day political grind. And I'm happy to talk about that with you, whatever it is you're interested in hearing, because I want it to be more of a conversation than me sitting here talking to you. I mean, you just heard my resume. Always thought I wanted to be a reporter. I grew up wanting to be Jane Pauley on the Today Show, so I'm dating myself. And went through journalism school, was a radio and TV reporter here in Columbia. But one of the things I got the opportunity to do as a reporter was go to the Democratic National Convention to cover that in 1992. It was in New York City. It was Bill Clinton's nominating convention for his first term in office. Spent a week with the South Carolina Democrats up there and was hooked. I loved politics. I loved covering politics when I was a reporter. So came back, continued my reporting, and then the state Democratic Party said, well, we're organizing and we want to add this role as a communications director. And because I had spent a week with them and had those contacts, they just reached out to me to see if I would be interested. And that took my career in a completely different direction than I had ever anticipated that it would. So glad at this point, looking back, hindsight, that I took the leap of faith and left journalism to become a political communicator. Because at the time, you couldn't do both. Like if you went into political communications, there was no going back to being a journalist. Now it's a little more squishy. You could go back and forth if you wanted at this point. But I did that. And in doing that, I also worked closely with the congressman's office. He had been elected in 92, and I went to work for the party in 93. So knew his staff well. And they came to me after being at the party for 2 years and said, we're looking for a communications director. Would you come do this job with us? Traditionally, the job was always in DC. He had 2 communications directors over those 2 years in DC, and for personal reasons, neither one of those worked out. So they decided, he doesn't really have a national profile. We're going to have our communications person be in South Carolina now. And that's how I ended up moving over to the congressman's office to do his communications. I'm sorry, does anybody have a question?
No, I think we just got somebody that was multitasking.
No worries. I do that all the time. So yeah, the rest is history. I came to work for the congressman, his second term in office, stayed 18 years, closer to 19 years in the Columbia office. Really loved everything about it. I got to grow in my role as he grew in his role. He wasn't really on the national scene when I first started, but by the time I left, he had already been majority whip the first time around. So South Carolina also grew in its prominence politically because we became the first in the South primary, got to have all of that fun with all the presidential candidates coming through the state, really seeing that firsthand. And then I just needed a change. Left for 5 years to go to the university, which was also a great experience. It was a great opportunity to get a master's degree and kind of expand my knowledge base and learn some new skill sets. But when he was elected majority whip again, some of you may know Yelverton Watkins. Yebby has been our longtime chief of staff, 30 years for the congressman. Yebby reached out to me and said, hey, would you come to DC? Which the timing was right for me. My kids were in college. My husband is a government teacher, and he couldn't think of anything better than me going to work for the government in Washington, D.C. So he was very supportive, and I took the 4 years. I did have a unique situation in that I traveled with the congressman, not personally with the congressman, but when he was in DC, I was in DC. And when he was in South Carolina, I was in South Carolina. So I did the back and forth, which the congressional staffs don't normally do, but I got to do that and keep grounded in both places, which was great. But after 4 years, I was tired. I was tired of that. And our office was downsizing anyway, as we had lost the majority, and everything in DC is very cyclical. So it was our time to downsize, and the Republicans turned to upsize. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity for me to step away from being the communications director. I think you all know what that role is. I don't know that I need to talk about it a whole lot. I dealt with all of the media, and there was a lot of it, a lot of interest in Jim Clyburn, especially over the last 4 years with his endorsement of Joe Biden for president and all that encompassed. He was the chair of the COVID committee when we were all going through the whole pandemic situation. There were just so many issues over the last 4 years that he was a central player in. So I really got to see from the front seat what that looked like.
Just being in the middle of all that would be exhausting to me, but
exhausting and exhilarating. I mean, all at the same time, right?
I mean, I'm a huge fan of the West Wing, and watching that, I understand from some friends that actually know Dee Dee Myers that she consulted on that, and she kept it as real as possible. And I'm thinking, why would anybody want to do that? It's like you're on call literally 24/7. You don't get a break.
You do not. But
main question I wanted, and one of the things that we talk about in this group with our different speakers is, what is it like as a woman coming into a leadership? Now, I know working in in Congressman Clyburn's office, a little bit different than most places. He's probably the most inclusive, wonderful person. That's just my take on him. And the times that I've met him and spoken with him, I've found him very gracious and kind. But what is it like as a woman coming into a very powerful field as you were walking into, because he was the majority whip, and I'm sure pre-people that have walked into that were mostly men. So what was it like for you as a woman to walk into that position and command that presence?
Well, like you pointed out, I was very lucky in whom I worked for. He is the father of 3 daughters, has no sons. He is very empowering to women. So I never really felt those barriers within my office. In fact, when I came in as communications director, our senior leadership team also had a woman as policy director and a woman as floor director. So, and they were Black women and I was a white woman. We had lots of diversity on our staff and really empowered women. So within my office, I didn't really struggle, but Congress itself it's very traditional, and
Patriarchal?
it is that, and it doesn't like change, right? It doesn't like to adapt to the needs of a changing society. And I saw that with other women. There were a lot of women elected over those 4 years that I was there who were mothers of young children, who were single mothers, who really had issues with even just the way we structured the congressional session. The session in Congress goes the whole year. It's not like the state legislature that's only 5 months. And we were usually 3 weeks in session and 1 week out. Well, if you live in California and you've got young kids, that's a lot of time to be away from your kids because it's very hard to go home on weekends. COVID kind of changed things for us for a while. Anyway, people learned to work remotely, and we went to kind of a 2 week in, 2 week out schedule so they could do congressional committees remotely via Zoom, like we're doing now. So there were only 2 session weeks where we had to be there for voting. And even then they had implemented proxy voting, which Congress had never done before. So that was a huge change. But here we are with the new majority and all of that's gone away. It's back to the 3 weekend schedule. There's no proxy voting. So it's a very difficult place to work as a woman because, as you said, it's 24/7, no matter what your role is. If you are the member of Congress or if you are a staff member, you are always on call. Things are always happening. You're always reacting to whatever the latest thing is that's going on in the world. So it's a little unforgiving in that way. You have to have a really good support system. You have to have colleagues who will back you up if you need, there were times I said, I need a week. I need a vacation. I need to hand off and just unplug. Somebody else needs to take the reins while I'm gone, which is great training for people who are under you, right? It gives them an opportunity to step up and take some responsibility for things. So it was a great learning opportunity for them. But I did that. I had to at times just say, I'm off the grid. If something's happening, great, we'll respond, but it won't be me. You just had to make sure you always had someone behind you who could pick up the slack when you weren't there.
So in other words, teamwork, particularly among women,
absolutely
is the biggest issue. I think that a lot of women tend to forget. We think that we're supposed to do it all, and to me, it's not about being the queen bee, but about spreading it out and training those that come up behind you, because you get hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody's got to pick that slack up, and you can't. I think women have that tendency to want to try to do it all without asking for help. And we need to do better about knowing how to not only do really well at our job, but bring those up behind us so they can also pick up the reins as needed.
Absolutely. And I had a great team. I had 3 people working under me in DC and 1 in South Carolina, and we all were very collaborative. We all knew what the other was doing, and I had 2, a deputy up in DC and the press secretary in the district who could take over when I was absent. And I'm really grateful that 2 of my hires were men, but most of them were women. So I tried to encourage as many women to come behind me. And one of my digital director, when I retired, took my place. And so I was thrilled another woman was filling that role.
When you were in this position, is there a woman that you met that made the biggest impact on you?
Well, I mean, Nancy Pelosi, I know that kind of goes without saying. To be there with Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House in that moment was incredible. I mean, truly it was. I got to be in the room in a lot of the leadership meetings, small leadership meetings with just the members of Congress and a few key staff members, but then also in big caucus meetings. that she would speak at. We had those twice a week, the WIT meeting and the caucus meeting, and she would speak at every one of those meetings. So just to see how she led, and it's funny, she would always relate it to being a mother. And it truly is. When you saw how she operated, it was how you would run your household, right? You would make sure that the people who, were acting out, you kind of calmed them down. You figured out what it was that they needed, and you quelled whatever the uprising was, right? I mean, you do that in your home. But she dealt with everyone as she would deal with her own children. It was never combative. It was never dismissive. She was always very inclusive. She wanted the feedback. She wanted to hear from everybody else. But at the same time, she realized that she was the leader and needed to lead the group because, it's like herding cats, right? There are a lot of people and a lot of opinions. So she was just very impressive to watch. I will say one thing I didn't like about Nancy Pelosi, and this is just me personally, she wore 3-inch heels everywhere, like stilettos everywhere. I want to stop that.
It's a power thing. I get. I
It
understand
is.
why she does it.
Yeah, I mean, she looks incredible. She's dressed to the nines. She is always impeccable, but I don't know how she does it.
Well, speaking of the daughter of my mother recently passed, but at 80 years old, when she walked into assisted living, she was wearing 3-inch heels and dressed impeccably. It's that generation of women.
It is, absolutely.
That is the power. What is the best piece of advice you've ever gotten from another woman about being in a position of leadership?
I mean, that's a good question. I think it's just to know your voice and know your values. In the political world, that's very important. And I think for anyone who is even considering running for office or a board, you are empowered when you really know what it is you value and what you want to accomplish. So I think you just need to find what that is that drives you. And that helps define the way you work, the way you serve. It just kind of defines everything about your role in whatever capacity it is. Public service is all about the greater good. So what is it you want to do to improve upon what already exists? And for women, we have a challenge in that we've not had a role for as long as men have had a role. We haven't had a voice as long, and people don't know what to expect a lot of times when a woman is in charge. So you have to demonstrate what that is, what leadership is to be a woman. And it doesn't have to be the same as a man. I think that's the miscalculation that some women make is I have to act as a man, as I think a powerful man would act. I don't think we have to do that to accomplish the same goals.
We had a question that came across. It says, what advice do you have for progressive women to get elected here in South Carolina, especially when the big majority is against us? And I can just say, because I'm taking a Congress class at Winthrop right now, and I've learned a lot about redistricting, and I've actually had to go into South Carolina and draw the district maps. She's got a good point. When the majority of people in this are Republicans, the voters are Republican, and the minority is the Democrats. But there is a way to do it. So I'd like to hear what you think.
Well, I wish I had a magic wand and could rectify a lot of the situation here. And redistricting is a huge issue. I mean, that is predominantly the issue, because if you look at how people vote in this state, it's usually a 55-45 split, right? So we should have that same split in the state legislature. We should have that same split in Congress. Congress has 7 members from South Carolina. 1 is a Democrat. And it's because of how the districts are drawn. They pack the one district and it makes the other ones much more conservative. I'm not trying to offend anybody who may be a Republican on here. It's just that is the fact. And the way we redraw districts is the legislature has the power. Well, when the legislature is Republican, they're going to draw it in their favor. I personally would love to see us go to a system where an impartial body drew those districts.
Iowa does that. We just did redistricting in that for that state in that class. It's a mock-up that we do, and they had a referendum or can't remember, but the voters decided this is how they wanted it done, and they got it passed, and that's how it's done. And I think it's I don't know if we can do that in South Carolina, but it would be awesome, because when you do look at the map, you can draw 3 to 4 districts that are completely evenly split and get at least some sort of a balance there.
Well, and that's the thing. And then the districts don't become so polarized, right? That's why we have the polarization that exists today, is because you can win from the extreme of your party on either side in the districts the way they're currently drawn. And so we've kind of pushed out the moderates because the districts are very polarized. If you had 4 Republican and 3 Democratic districts, those would not be as extreme. You wouldn't have them packed so much. The margin of victory would be very slim, which means they could be flipped by a progressive to get to the question, you know, if you have the right issues at the right time, it's winnable by either side. And that's the way it should be. It shouldn't be, you know, because we're a Republican state, we need more Republican legislators. It should be about the issues in the district. And I think even as a progressive running, it will be nearly impossible in one of these districts that's packed. That's just reality. But if you are in a district that is more balanced, then you just need to find the issues that relate to the people in the district. That's everything gets nationalized these days to all of these, you know, whatever they're talking about in Washington becomes the same issues that they talk about in the district. And I'm coming from a Democratic perspective, so sorry that these are the examples I'm using, but things like CRT, the critical race theory, and you know, the hot button issues that we're trying to divide people over, rather than what people really care about in their districts is, I need good, clean drinking water. I need good schools for my kids. I need access to the healthcare system. Those are the things that you need to be focused on when you're running for any office, whether you're a progressive, you're a conservative. You need to know your constituency, the people that you want to serve, and figure out what those issues are. Figure out what those issues are for you. And what your positions would be on those issues. It won't guarantee you'll win. There's no guarantee, right? But
Hope, Trish, this is Barbara. Can I throw in one other thing?
Yes, ma'am, you most certainly can.
Thank you. I love the idea of independent commissions, et cetera, et cetera. This is South Carolina.
I know
It's going to be a cold day in purgatory before we get that far. And the League of Women Voters has been pitching that for, I mean, maybe as long as I've known that the League of Women Voters existed.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you about one of the things that WIL is doing that is sort of, I'll call it interim. We have researched every district down to the precinct level from 2014 all the way through big line redistricting 2022. All of the vote, all of the leaning of each of the districts. And we're going to start, I believe it's, Emily, you may need to correct me, I believe it is the 22nd of March with something that we call office hours. And once a week, we're going to be available, different people are going to be available on different topics, but for an hour. And the one I'm going to talk about is these opportunity seats. So to your example, there are many seats that we walk away from because we don't recognize the historic nature of it. So an incumbent can be beat with the right vote. So you could have on a national level Joe Biden could have won by a large margin a particular South Carolina House seat, and the House member himself may still have won that seat. So what we're doing is trying to work with women to identify those seats that are leaners, that
That's right.
offer opportunities, so that people don't just say, well, I'm going to run for District 46, or I'm going to run for this school board seat, when it's not that possible. But
Right.
where it is
Right.
possible, we
Yes.
want everyone to use their resources wisely, whether those are their time or money. So stay tuned as I think we'll be announcing those in our newsletter tomorrow, maybe.
Well, that's fantastic.
Trying to put that- Yeah, it was quite, we got a grant to be able to do that. It was thousands of hours
Yes,
of hundreds of thousands of little data points. So,
right. And I don't think people realize all that goes into running for office, and that's part of it. You got to do your research, right? You
Yeah,
have to know what is winnable and what would make a winning campaign in those districts. So that's kudos to you. That's great work. So I look forward to seeing it.
Taking this class that I'm taking right now is really eye-opening as to how actually Congress runs, how it runs in the state level, and how it goes right. And Dr. Holder happens to be a very good professor as well, and he's retiring, unfortunately, at the end of the year. But he says, as a Democrat teaching political science, you have to be nonpartisan in your classroom. He says it's getting increasingly difficult for him to do that. So, you know, where I think you could be going with this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is maybe look more on the local level, because that where you can get more progressives in office. Because if you look at the state map, the entire low country and up below Columbia, they're just pockets of these Democrat progressive areas, and the entire low country could be a progressive area, except for one little area that they pull into it. And there are places in the upcountry that are absolutely progressive, but you have to be willing to step up and run for the local offices. Start small and then get your name out there and work your way up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And they're nonpartisan offices. I mean, city elected offices are nonpartisan. So you would have a good shot. You don't have a label. We love to label people, but you could run in a nonpartisan race as well.
School boards particularly, and
Yes.
right now would be an excellent place to start.
And we need good people on school boards right now. There's a lot of mischief going on school boards.
Emily says, what is the biggest change you've seen in national politics in your time working with Congress?
I would say the partisanship issue has been a huge change, because I started in 95. And that was kind of the rise of Newt Gingrich after that. And it truly changed everything. It changed the dynamics of everything, because it was much more of a collegial atmosphere. When I first started, it wasn't the us versus them on everything. People work together and they socialize together.
Mhm.
Now they don't. Everybody goes into their corner and nobody comes out, and when they do, it's not pretty. And that shouldn't be the way government works. It is supposed to be a collaborative effort. It is supposed to be compromise. And now it's my way or no way, and I won't even talk to you because you're of a different political persuasion than I am. And I think that's to our detriment.
And I don't think it matters now between whether it's male or female.
No.
Because we've seen progressives, not progressives, but extreme conservatives, females, that are actually doing more harm to women than the men are in some cases. So how do you address that when you're dealing with a woman who is absolutely the opposite of you in the way you think, and you can see that what she's doing is more harm and more patriarchal to women than her male counterparts?
I don't have a good answer for that, because I'm not sure. Thinking of the example that I'm sure we're all thinking of,
Yes.
She would not listen to reason. There are people out there who are just so myopic in how they view the world and what they think the best way to do that is, and they're not willing to listen. So it is a serious challenge. What we have to do is try and find ways to get those people out of power, to replace them with someone who is more reasonable, who would have a conversation with you and not just try and shout you down. Again, a lot of this goes back to redistricting and just doing this grassroots effort. It will take time. I think one of the things the congressman says all the time is about the pendulum swinging. I mean, it's always going to go back and forth. You don't know how long it's going to take to get there, but I think that's true of the political time that we're in right now. This too will change. When it will change and how it will change and who will make it change is part of the question. And I think all of the women on this call are people who want to be part of that change. So I think that's a good thing.
I'm sure you met Liz Cheney.
Yes.
And my impression, not that I've ever politically agreed with her, but I find that she was a completely patriotic, very devout person of what was best for the country.
And that's what we're missing in politics today, is people who are in it for the greater good and not in it for the personal gain. She truly, I don't have much in common with her politically. Most of the people on my side of the aisle didn't. She was a genuinely wonderful member of Congress. She did exactly what you were supposed to do as a member of Congress. She represented her constituents and her viewpoints, but listened to people on the other side of the aisle and would take their opinions into consideration. I'll tell you, in the latter days of the last Congress, when she was working on the January 6th commission, she had to sit on the Democrat side of the aisle. So the floor of the House of Representatives is divided. Democrats sit on one side, Republicans sit on the other. She sat with the Democrats because she was so ostracized by her party. She could not even sit with them on the floor. So she would sit on the Democrat side. And that's a shame.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a shame.
And I think what we're looking for as women is more women like Liz Cheney, right, as far as not so much the political aspects, but the idealism of you do what's right for your constituents and for what's right for the country.
Absolutely.
And take the risk that what you do may cost you the election, but it gains you the country. So,
and that's what people need to remember. It's not about you. I mean, when you offer for elective office, for public service, you are serving the public. You're not serving yourself. And I think that gets lost these days.
Does anyone else have, let's see, Lisa Springer, school boards definitely are concerned, especially as it relates to special education issues and districting and the inclusion of transitioning military families into the system. I'm not sure quite what the question is about that, but it may be just having military families transitioning into public schools. Lisa, can you, if you're muted, can you unmute and kind of elaborate on what you are looking to get?
Yes, hello. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I was a military family myself with a special education child. And so I was on one of the meetings, and I forgot which one it was, forgive me at this time, but the mention was made, I think, about purple schools, purple districting. I don't know how you call it here in this state in South Carolina, but in states where there are huge populations of the military, which of course we have Fort Jackson here and Shaw and everything like that, the issue becomes when we transition to a new school, how do our kids fit in? How do they even get to play sports? Because you haven't been at a team, especially on the high school level. So that issue about advocating and being on school boards is to understand the dynamics of being a military, transitioning to a new state, and how that plays into the school board understanding the needs of the military child and the families to make them even feel welcome. And so I think you spoke to even just running for office and starting on your school boards. There are plenty of positions for that. So I'm thinking about that as you say that, because I thought, where do I start? And myself, I have my own organization, but I haven't really, I do it only for the military, speak to moms how to do it. And but now I'm thinking about going to the school board level, because they need to have a voice. And so I would not only be representing special education parents, but military parents also. So thank you for making that point about you can start at the local level. I know nothing about politics. Just like you said, I never thought that. I am a rehabilitation counselor, certified rehabilitation counselor, but I was never a person in politics until I had to advocate for my son, who's now 36, when there was no child left behind. We didn't even have the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I know it from, this military language, boots on ground. I know it by like the back of my hand. So I thought maybe it's time for me to step up, because I'm at that age, 60, and now I can do that. And so thank you for bringing that up about I can at least start there.
Well,
That
Lisa,
was the point I was making.
yeah, I love your story, because I think it's true of a lot of people that have gotten into politics. They get into politics because they're passionate. They're advocating for something, and they've usually gotten in through some sort of grassroots means, advocating for their child or the military community or whatever it is. Those are exactly the things that fuel a good candidate, because you know your mission, you know the constituency, you already have a coalition behind you, which is another important thing when you're running for office. You probably have a network that you've acquired during your work in this advocacy area that can help bolster your campaign. So it sounds to me like you're off to a great start.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
That's a
Thank
great
you.
and to a note that Barbara put out to everybody about the workshops that are being done this weekend. If you know someone who wants to run for office, Lisa, there's an opportunity there. She's listed the link on the chat. If you haven't been in chat, please look. It's the link to joining the leadership workshops and learning how to lead and run for office. And I think those are awesome. I love the fact that they call it spring training and bring in all metaphors. I love baseball. So that really works for me. But I think also it's not just about, and you're behind the scenes. So I think some people forget you can make a lot of changes behind the scenes. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. I myself have never run for office. So I'm speaking of something that I've witnessed, but not actually done myself. There's so many roles that you can play behind the scenes. And I would just encourage everyone, if you have any interest, volunteer on a campaign if you don't want to be the candidate yourself. You can learn so much through that process, and candidates need that support system, right? Nobody can do this on their own. You have to have people behind you who are in your corner, who are willing to do the day-to-day work to make that happen. I did that in a congressional office. Jim Clyburn couldn't do all of his messaging on his own. He couldn't write everything he wrote on his own. He needed some help with that, and that was the role that I played. So every candidate needs a team. Be part of the team. You can make phone calls, you can canvass, you can knock doors, you can help raise money, which is a huge part of running for office, which scares everyone to death. But they need people to help tap into those networks to bring some money to the table so those candidates can be successful. There are a million ways that you can get involved in a campaign. And I will tell you, you may not get paid for it, and that's okay. I think what you will learn from the experience and from the people that you meet and from the difference that you make, that's reward in itself.
Yeah, and I can tell you and so can Barbara and others of us who have actually worked on the governor's campaign or a House member's campaign or whatever, that if it weren't for the volunteers, a lot of stuff wouldn't get done, because you could have paid staff, but they could only do so much. And
Absolutely.
As hard as Barbara and I worked on the governor's campaign the time before last with our wonderful James Smith, I learned an amazing amount of stuff, to the fact that I was able to take that to other volunteer work with other campaigns. And it makes you a little bit smarter about how things actually do work in a campaign and what it takes that maybe you might run for office because you see what it takes, but you can also be the power behind the throne. And sometimes that's just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And once you get the bug, it's kind of hard to put it down. It's it gets in your blood.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is so true. Is there any other questions out there? We've got about 20 more minutes. Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about. Anyone? Well, then I'll keep asking questions. I'm good at this. So
Oh,
what
hey,
is
I'm
it
sorry.
like- Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Trish. Hey, it's Laura
No,
Whitmore. Sorry, I couldn't
please
figure out
go
how to
ahead.
get myself off mute.
Go ahead.
So one of the things, and I think these workshops are awesome, and I'm volunteering and see them every session, and so I'm super proud of what we're doing. But Hope, can you maybe talk about? I feel like women put this pressure on ourselves to be far more prepared than maybe our male counterparts are. Can you talk a little bit about reality when someone actually goes into office and how prepared you can really be and how prepared you really have to be in order to make an impact?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Laura. I think men have this innate confidence that they think they can do anything and don't really need to prepare. I'm generalizing here, and obviously that's not true of everyone, but women tend to feel the opposite, as you said, that we feel like we need to over prepare so that we don't look dumb or we don't look like we don't know what we're doing. When it turns out anyone who's their first time offering for office or getting elected to office is new to that role. They don't know what they're doing. We all learn as we go. And I think what women need to be open to is the idea is you don't have to be perfect, right? You learn as you go. Just like Trish was saying, when you worked on a campaign, you learn so much about campaigning. And it's not until you do something that you know how to do something, right? You have to actually be in the arena in order to become good at what it is you want to do. And that's true of anything. I think we've all, whatever our first job was, we didn't walk in the door knowing what we were doing. Politics is no different. No different for men or for women. We learn by doing, and I think women tend to be better listeners. We're better at absorbing information, and we don't come in with all the bluster in the beginning, trying to prove ourselves. So I think that's actually prepares us better for the role because we are open to it and don't come in with preconceived notions. So women can do anything men can do. We just may do it in a different way. And I think that's part of the importance of having women there, because we do things differently and you need those different perspectives. We need everybody at the table.
Even South Carolina politics is changing considerably, particularly within the Democratic Party. I know that volunteering at the precinct level and at the county level and going to those state conventions was eye-opening as well. I was there when there was 20 some odd, people running for the primary, for the South Carolina primary, and it was a zoo, but it was so much fun.
Yes.
It was a blast. I went to parties. I went to the cocktail events. I was there with John Spratt when he was there with Jim Clyburn, representing Clyburn. To me, that was the most touching time.
Yeah. Because
where Jim was and where Spratt was, but being in those rooms with all those people, particularly the women that were running, was just absolutely amazing. And I think you would probably agree with me. Go to some of those things. You really get to and go to the parties and go to the events, because that's where you really get to see some of the things, like seeing the sausage made almost, I would say.
Absolutely. And I think that all of that's happening right now, the reorganization. So the precinct meetings and the county conventions, and then that's how you get elected to the state convention. State convention is where they will, like, they're electing a new Democratic Party chairperson this time. So, there will be some changeover within the party leadership. So it's a really good time to get involved and to have your voice heard on that level. I know there are 2 women, Black women, running right now. There may be more who offer, but how great to get a Black woman leader of the Democratic Party right now, and what changes will that mean for the party? But when I was very young and was starting out in politics, I ran and I was precinct president and did all of that. And that's where really the rubber meets the road. That's when you make the phone calls and you get your neighbors out to vote, and you go to those parties and you have a block party. We had a block party when James Smith was my state representative, and James came to our block party and all my neighbors got to meet him. So those little things anyone can do. You don't have to travel to do those things. You don't have to have money to do those things, but you can be part of the process, and it is so much fun. I mean, if you are into politics, South Carolina, there's no better place to be in politics because of that focus at the national level, and it trickles down to the local level, right? But yes, I mean, I was at that fish fry. I helped work at that fish fry where we had the 20
Oh my God.
candidates. We had over 300 media from around the world, literally around the world at that fish fry. So it was quite the event. But
that was my first time at one of those fish fries, and I was like, my eyes were like this big because of all the people that was there and the celebrities. I mean, yeah. I got to meet Danny Glover, for goodness sakes, and Jesse Jackson. I mean, you can't do that any other place than at one of those big meetings. And, to even see Elizabeth Warren up close and personal and speak to her was just amazing, and helping young women push their way through the men to get to those people and say that we're running for office. And it's like, hey, you don't say, excuse me, you just walk right up there and you introduce yourself.
Right. That's right.
So that was,
we had such great access here because we are an early primary state, and having been in it this long, it's kind of easy to take it for granted, but you realize that some of those other states don't even get visits from presidential candidates, or they get a visit from a presidential candidate in one town. They're here constantly for a year. And having these events all over the state, and there are just so many ways to get involved.
Well, and if you volunteer, you get to help set those things up, because I helped set up Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, and Kamala Harris coming to Winthrop and to Rock Hill. And I helped set up, and I got to meet them in person. And, if you volunteer as a member of your party volunteer group, you don't pick a side until after the primary. So that allows you to come in and see everybody and meet everyone face to face. And I think, like you said, I encourage people to get involved. I don't care which political party you're involved with.
Right.
Get involved. Now, I know where my but just doing that, and Barb would tell you the same thing. That's how you meet people. And that's how you get involved on the statewide level, just by getting started at the county level. Barb, what you got to say?
Well, I was going to say, at the risk of going against the tide here, I spend a lot of time telling even my most progressive Democratic friends that they need to learn to love some moderate Republican women.
Yep.
Because we live in the state of South Carolina. The supermajority in the legislature is not something that we can fight through rallies and marches. We have to change it one vote at a time.
Right.
And quite honestly, I would rather have 3 Rita Allisons
Yes.
than one of those
Marjorie Taylor Greens.
white guys in the green jackets. I'm sorry. I mean, the point is that while one could love their partisan favorites, my daughter is a Bernie Sanders socialist member of the Pennsylvania legislature. So, I mean, I know where all that goes, but this is South Carolina and
Yes.
we need to be
Yes.
looking for people who can win.
Yes.
And Hope, when you were talking about finding the issues your constituents are comfortable with, we also need to find candidates that understand those issues,
Mhm.
but also have a far better chance of winning. And sometimes those are not going to be dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. So
It was,
your-
it was those moderate women, Republican women, that helped get the choice issue saying, you're not going to mess with my womb, you know.
three
you have-
Republican senators.
And I
um,
admire every one of them for that. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Barbara. It's finding the moderates and helping them get elected sometimes is worth the effort. Sometimes you have to step out of your party to do what's best for your state.
Absolutely.
I
And
agree.
that's what it is. I mean, it should be about finding compromise and working across the aisle to get issues resolved. That's the ideal. That's what government, when it functions best, that's how it works.
That's what women do well.
Absolutely.
We solve
Absolutely.
problems. We work across lines. It doesn't matter whether they're party lines or color lines or religious lines. There's a problem and we put our heads together and say, how can we fix this?
Absolutely.
That's why we have this circle, lead like a woman. It's not lead like a Democratic woman or lead like a Republican woman.
Right.
It's work together.
Absolutely.
Done
And
with
it's
my
reaching out
tale.
and making those and talking to each other. And I agree with you 100%, Barbara. I think you're absolutely right. We've got about 10 more minutes. Does anybody else have any comments or questions that they'd like to raise with Hope? If not, Hope, is there any last parting pieces of wisdom for us that you can give us?
I think what we've been talking about, get involved. I mean, that's the biggest thing we need as a state and as a country is more women getting involved. Despite all the progress we've made, of course, my reference is Congress. Congress is still only 27% women. That's wrong. You know, we are the majority of the voters, we are the majority of the population, and yet we're only represented in Congress by 27%. And we're all celebrating the gains that we've made, which are wonderful, but it's not enough. And people have to start at the grassroots level and work their way up. We're not all going to run for Congress tomorrow and get elected. Run for those school board races, get involved in a local campaign, do part of a party organization, whatever the role is that you choose to do, get out there and do it and bring more women with you, because our voice needs to be heard and needs to be part of the conversation. And it's going to take time, but I think through groups like yours, which I wholly support, I think we'll get there. So I'm happy to do what I can to help you.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway.
Emily, who is do we have I can't, my brain's a little off right now and I don't have everything from me. Who is our speaker for next month?
We don't have anyone confirmed yet. I have some feelers out there to see who we can get.
And if those of you who are on the call, if you have suggestions of people you would like to hear from, please send those to Emily. She will work with that. If you have a way to, ease us into that person and say, yes, could you please, participate? And I know Hope was a little strong arm, but that's okay. We're glad to get you any way we can. We'll take anyone that way. But if you know women in South Carolina who are great leaders or great behind the scenes people that can give us insight, please suggest those, because I find that every time I come to one of these meetings that I learned something new and it kind of revs me up until the next month to get things done. So I hope you all feel the same way.
Tricia, I just put in a link to our 51% club, to Hope's point. It's a small, it could be large, be generous, we like that, monthly contribution, because it takes work. Like they say about the internet, it's 24/7. We work 12 months a year to get women involved. It means that we need to keep our resources built all throughout those 12 months. So we'd love to have your support any way or any amount you're willing to help.
That's great.
My
And
last
if,
pitch.
well, and if it weren't for James Smith, Barbara and I probably would not have actually met in person. We know some people in common, and she got me involved in this. So, it's all also about the connections you're making when you're involved with these things, not only through volunteering with your political party or with a specific group that believes in the same thing you do. This is statewide and national. I'm part of the American Association of University Women. I have friends all across the United States that I'm part of network groups of women that are across the United States that we get together on Zoom once a month, and we actually are the best for each other. And this is the same thing with politics or any leadership position. Those are your circle of women, and those are the ones who are going to support you, and they're going to recommend people to you, and they're going to be there for you. So particularly when it comes to shoring up your girth, when it comes to having the courage to step out and do something outside your comfort zone, those women will push you sometimes when nobody else will. All right, well, that's it for this month. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next month, ladies. And I hope that you'll join us as well.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks,
All right.
Emily.